There was a plethora of trees standing tall in front of me. It was hard to say what led me in front of the forest. I guess the best way to describe it would be that small whisper. This was a voiceless whisper, a whisper that I heard, buried deep within the crevices of my heart. This is the same whisper that has been guiding me the entire time, and it has not let me down yet. Was it truly a whisper? I'm not sure. But whatever it may have been, I choose to listen to it. I choose to believe in it. When my vacation on the cruise ship was over, I decided not to waste any more time doing mundane things. I quit my job and left my apartment to make myself homeless once again. I started going wherever this whisper led me. I followed where the wind blew. After driving my car around for some time, I eventually felt compelled to come to this forest. It was a distance away from any town or city, away from any sort of civilization. The forest before me was very ominous. I was standing on what seemed to be a makeshift bridge. There was a small stream that flew underneath me. I couldn't tell where it begun or ended due to the trees blocking my eyesight. It was hard to say what kind of forest it was. It seemed to look like a rainforest, but there was no rainfall in front of me. It was actually raining on the right side of the forest. For some reason, the rain clouds only hovered on the right side. The trees were dark and some trunks were gnarled. Some trees even looked like there were faces on the side of it. There were scrubs and other random plant life spreading all across the ground. Luckily, I was standing on a clear path from what I could see anyway. I knew exactly what this forest was. The Everfree Forest. I also knew this was the obstacle I would have to tackle in order to obtain the next element. I knew that I would have to prepare myself both physically and mentally. If this forest was so accurate, I would not know what could happen inside. The weather would be very random and sporadic. I would hope that there were no monsters like in the show. I'd rather go without the manticores, ursas, dragons, pear sprites, timber wolves, and the cockatrices. There was always the sea serpents, but the only one on the show was simply fabulous. When I went to the temple Daring Do adventured in, Awizodel was never at the temple. Likewise, in the Diamond Dog's cave, there were no dogs in football helmets running around the floors. Looking at it that way, I think that the mythological creatures should be missing from the forest. I pulled on the scraps of my reliable backpack to make sure it was tight against my back. I strode into the forest, hoping to myself that everything would be okay. I was very lucky that this path was here to lead the way, so I would not have to look into the massive trees where the darkness was thick. I started to realize that the further I went down the path, the more the night crept on me. I was getting scared. But I knew I had to be strong. I knew I had to continue. I had to remember what happened to the main six in the forest. Mostly, for them, the forest dangers were psychological mind tricks. Some of the perils were not even real. I have to remember that my greatest enemy in here would be my mind. Although she might not know it, Pinkie Pie is a good advice giver. I have to stand up tall. I have to learn how to face these fears. I loosened up my shoulders a bit and put my head up. I will face the fears of this forest head on. No longer looking at the ground, I could see something up ahead on the path that looked familiar. The path continued on as normal. However, there was a certain blue flower that was sprouting that covered a majority of the trail. This flower had a bulb in the center with large leaves coming out on the side. This flower removed any doubt that this was the Everfree Forest. The flower was the poison joke. I really wasn't in the mood to shirk today, or possibly get a girl voice. I wasn't really sure what the flower would do to me, so it's probably best to avoid it. I know, because even though I'm not barefoot and could probably still be okay from stepping on it, this is supernatural. Who knows what can happen? The only problem with avoiding it is that there was no visible way of getting around it while staying on the path. There were some brushed aside bushes just before the patch of flowers aside the path. I would assume that someone had already been here, or perhaps it could just be the way that the forest grew. I should not think so deeply about it. It was the only way I can take to get around the flowers. Well, I hope so, anyway. The problem about this makeshift path was that it led right into the relentless dark of the forest. This, however, was my only option as of now. I stepped up to where the secondary route started. Peering in, I could not see anything. I suppose that's good and bad. Good that there is no red glowing eyes like in the show, but bad because I will be walking in blind. I suddenly remembered that I had a flashlight in my backpack. I pulled it out, thinking that the flashlight will make getting through here easy. I flicked it on, illuminating my path. With a gulp, I started to follow the path. As soon as I took my first step into the dark, the flashlight started to flicker sporadically. After about 10 seconds of doing this, it shut off. Of course. Isn't that the way things go? I had some extra batteries, but there was no way I could find them with no light. I could back out now, but that would not solve my problems. I needed to keep going forward. I outstretched my arms so I would not run into a tree. I was unable to see anything, yet I could still barely make out the ground. I also was able to somewhat feel where the shrubs have been brushed aside from whoever went through this path ahead of me. I had no idea where I was going, and was starting to regret taking this way. Going through the poison joke might have been a better idea than this. Through seemingly endless hours, I continued to stumble through the complete darkness. Finally, I started to see some illumination. Not the brightest light, but I could see something. Seeing the light made me excited, so I rushed to move closer towards it. The price of rushing, however, made some branches whiplash into my arms and face. They stung, but I just wanted to get out of the black. The light was now in front of me, close by only mere inches. I finally stood in the light, with poison joke right under my feet. I was standing in the field of the nasty flowers. I looked to my right to see that I was only about 2 feet into the path of flowers. I must have gone in a giant circle. Frustrated, I stomped my way through the flowers to the other side, no longer caring if something might happen to me. On the other side of the foul flowers, I stood somewhat accomplished and a little worried. I hope nothing bad will become of me because of those flowers, but it felt real good to kick them everywhere and destroy most of the path. Thinking about it left an evil grin on my face. Now that that problem was out of the way, I was able to continue forward. Before long, there was a path that branched off the main trail into another. I was at a fork in the road and wasn't sure which way to go. I felt no impulse to go either way, so I decided to just go right. There wasn't much distinction between the two paths. They were both dark and mysterious. After going through the thick of the woods earlier, I did not feel as afraid to go on the paved paths. Even though that led me around in a circle, it was maybe best I took it, because it made me less afraid of the forest. The path I took led right up to a cave. A huge cave. This wasn't some ordinary cave that would hold a bear. The size of this cave was beyond imagination. Could this have been where I had to go? I put my hand on the stone, which was the corner of the opening of the cave. It had been here for a while. There was moss and thick bushes growing over the sides of the cave. The entrance was even partially covered due to hanging moss. With my hand still on the side, I squinted my eyes and looked inside the cave. I could see about a foot inside, but visibility was cut off by darkness. I dug into my backpack and pulled out with my flashlight. Hopefully it will want to work. I turned it on, however there was no light. But I packed diligently this time. I was not going to have the same problem I had in the Diamond Dog Cave with my flashlight. I brought an extra set of batteries. I replaced the batteries, then sang a little prayer. I turned the switch to the on position. It worked! The flashlight beam was at full strength. I looked back toward the cave and pulled my flashlight up so I could look inside to see what there was. As soon as I aimed my flashlight in, I heard a sound. The sound was full of bass and very faint. However, as the sound traveled down the cave towards me, it got louder and louder. It was a growl from a very big creature. It was so loud that I dropped my flashlight so I could cover my ears with my hands. Without any hesitation, I turned away from the cave and started running as fast as my legs could carry me back, down the path from where I came. My hands were still on my ears, and I kept repeating the word, "Nope," to myself repeatedly. As I was still running down the path from where I once came, I started to remember that cave. That was the cave that housed the Ursas. I'm in no doubt that the growl was from the Ursa Major. I think it's safe to give a big check to there being monsters in here. I ran all the way back to the fork in the road where I finally stopped to catch my breath. I never had the chance to look back when I was running, so I took a quick look over my shoulder. Luckily, I wasn't being chased. I probably would have realized that if it was actually chasing me, there would have been earthquakes. I knew I would not be taking that path again, so I suppose the only other option I have is the left path. I was really hoping there wouldn't be any monsters. The path was long, but there were no creatures, at least not yet. The wind occasionally picked up, and an owl gave off a hoot, but there wasn't anything that made me jump. The scenery never seemed to change. It seemed like I kept repeating the same trail over and over. My legs were getting tired. However, there was something at the end of the path. Wishing I had binoculars, I tried to focus my eyes on what it was. It seemed to be a structure of some sort. However, it was a structure inside a tree? I picked up my pace a little, and small traces of dust from the trail started to take flight. It was a house. But why is there a house in the middle of the forest? Who would live out... Oh. Zecora would. Realization showed on my face. This was Zecora's house. I scurried up to the house. It looked like it did in the show. It almost blended with the rest of the forest because it was a house inside of a tree. There were bottles filled with liquid hanging down from the branches on some black rope. Tribal masks seemed to guard the entrance of the house. There were also true windows on the side of the tree. I went up to the door and stood in front of it. It looked like there was no trace of movement inside the tree. I knocked on the door 3 times, however there was no answer. I figured that Zecora wasn't anywhere to be found. But I have to wonder, why are there supernatural creatures from the show, but no ponies or zebras? It's a mystery that I wished to figure out. However, I didn't think today would be that day. After figuring that no one was home, I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. It was not even acting as if it was locked. It seemed like someone superglued the entire door shut. I even tried to put a little force into the door, but that only ended up straining my shoulder. I took a step back from the house to get a full view of it. I've never seen a pony house, or a zebra tree in this case. A hoot from an owl broke my attention from the house. It was neat to see Zecora's hut, but I knew I wouldn't get the element here. I noticed that there was another trail behind the house. It looks like it wasn't connected to the previous trail I was on. This forest is so confusing. There are trails everywhere. I have to keep moving, though. I took the path behind Zecora's house and kept walking along the trail. The moon was full tonight. Pretty ironic that it is, too. When the ponies first arrived through the Everfree Forest to go find the elements, the moon was full. I was glad that the moon was full as well, as it spread a little light on the path of the Everfree. I was closing in on where I needed to go to find the next element. I could just feel it. While I was walking down the path, things seemed to get a little darker. Yet the moon was not being blocked. It was almost as if there was an aura that made this area darker than the rest. What made this place different? Not too long after the darkness came, there was a light fog that began to form in the area. With every step I took, it got ever so slightly thicker. The chills went up my back, but I kept treading on. This zone of the Everfree Forest is more peculiar than the rest. I knew something was up ahead, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to meet it. But I knew this is where I had to go. Further along the path, the fog got extremely thick, to the point where I couldn't even see past it. I braced myself for the fog by holding my breath like I was swimming underwater. I started to pick up my speed so I could ram through the fog. Eventually, I got enough speed as to where I was doing a full-on sprint, straight into it. The veil of grey was before me, and I closed my eyes. Without a sound, I ran straight through the thick fog that only lasted for a few feet. After opening my eyes a little, I could see that there was no more fog in sight. The thick wall behind me acted like a barrier to keep the rest of the fog from getting in. I stopped my running and came to a complete stop while releasing the breath I had held. In retrospect, that might have not been a good idea, just to run through the fog blinded. There could have been a cliff on the other side of it, or worse, probably not one of my brighter moments. I felt the sensation that this would be the area I would receive the next element. My backpack, which held the rest of the gems, would also agree, as they gave off a high-pitched noise like they have before when I have had them on me. On my right were ruins. There were deep cracks along the stone that was the wall of the former building. Moss and trees were growing out of the cracks, showing that these have been ruins for quite some time. In front of this building were grand steps that didn't age as much as the rest. At the top of the stairs was a mighty wooden door. However, it had started to decay over time. There was also a broken structure that was behind the first that seemed to be a lookout, or perhaps a bedroom, as this used to be a castle. I knew it was a castle. The only castle that I knew of was in the Everfree Forest. These were the ancient ruins of the Castle of the Pony Sisters. This was the same place that the main six defeated Nightmare Moon, using the elements of harmony. I looked to my left to see that the bridge the ponies crossed over to get here was no longer tied across the valley. It seemed Rainbow Dash's knot did not hold. Or perhaps I may just be in a different time period, where maybe they haven't defeated Nightmare Moon yet. I quickly backed out of those thoughts, knowing that they would only distract me for the time being. Now is not a good time to be having mind-blowing thoughts. I turned back to the right and walked to the ruins and up the great stairs. The wooden door, although there were holes in it, still stood strong. The rusty doorknob was there, so I gave that a try, and to my surprise, it worked like it was brand new. Inside the castle ruins, there were 6 pillars that were now broken and useless, as there was no ceiling anymore. Vines, which possessed little leaves every few inches, grew up the pillars. The ground was like solid concrete and looked mostly undamaged. There were window frames all around the walls, but there was no glass, only the metal that made the glass more decorative. In the middle was the most noticeable feature. It was a statue that was large at the base, its top being a sphere. From below the sphere, beams struck out, beams that were used to have the purpose of holding smaller spheres. I knew from the show those spheres were what Twilight thought were the elements of harmony, but came to realize that they were not after Nightmare Moon destroyed them. A small sparkle on top of the sphere quickly caught my eye. There was something on top of it. I took a few steps forward and squinted my eyes, focusing on what was on top. It was a gem. It had to be an element. I was too far away to actually see what it was, so I started to pace forward with a little bounce in my step towards the statue. There was also a small grin on my face. I was almost at the base of the statue when... crunch. There was someone behind me. It sounded like someone just stepped on one of the random leaves that were strewn across the floor. I stopped dead in my tracks. I froze. A familiar voice emerged from behind me and spoke. I told you not to go in that cave. I slowly turned around to see a face that I couldn't quite place, but somehow I know I have seen before. He wore some grubby work clothes with nothing else that would make him stand out from a crowd. He leaned on his side towards the door, looking straight at me with a smirk that made me want to knock off him because he scared me. However, he didn't appear hostile, so I think it's alright to be a little bit more relaxed. The mysterious man started to walk toward me, saying, "But you did anyway." He paused for a moment looking at me, tilting his head. "And you survived even after that cave-in." How does he know me? He stopped again. "You don't remember me, do you? Remember we talked a little bit at the gas station?" I tried to remember back to when I have talked to this man in a gas station. Nothing was ringing a bell until I looked in his shirt to see his name tag. Wrote very simply was the name Mac. I started back to him. You, why? Was all that I could manage to say back. I was betting you were wondering why I'd be out here. His smirk vanished, and he put his head slightly down. You see, our section of the city has had some trouble as of late, with the economy going downhill and all that. He stopped and started to scratch his head. Be honest with you, I don't really understand it. All I understand is that we have families without any food and unable to feed the children. I was saddened at this, but continued to let him speak. We even had some people go into the cave you also went through to see if there were gems we could sell. But after days of digging through the rubble, nothing was found. All the talk about gems being in the cave were nothing but rumors. I recalled seeing gems in the caves, but perhaps they couldn't get to them because of all the rocks in the way. I decided not to mention that I saw them in there, as it would only depress him more. Matt continued. Someone else said that she remembers hearing there was a slightly valuable gem in the forest. If we got this gem, we could sell it and get food and shelter for everyone. It might have been just another rumor, but we had to take a chance. Mac looked up to the gem that was on top of the statue. And I'm glad we took that chance. He was looking at the element. He couldn't sell that. Could he? I have traveled all these years to come get these elements. Before I could think any more, he interrupted. Say, could you get up there and grab that for me, please? I'm getting a little old for this stuff. He wore an innocent smile. He had no idea how much this element meant to me. I did as he asked, and started to climb the statue with relative ease. This entire journey had made me stronger, so tasks like this were not as hard as they originally were. I made it to the top, and the gem was before me. It was purple, diamond-shaped. However, it didn't appeal to me as much as the other elements did. It was probably just because of the dreary forest, though. I grabbed the element and made the descent down the statue. Getting safely down, I walked back over to Mac, looking at the element I had in my hand. Mac exclaimed, Attaboy! Everyone will be so happy to see this. The children will finally be able to eat. Mac was very exuberant, and then held out his hand to receive the element. I looked deeply into the gem for a few seconds. All my life, I've ran around the world to collect the elements. I started to clutch tight around the element, and then put my arm back down along my side, still holding on. I shot my gaze up to Mac and looked him square in the eye. Mac's smile slowly started to fade. He also retreated a tad when I looked at him. Still staring at him, I proclaimed, Yes, they will be able to eat again. I brought my hand up to Mac's and joined my hand with a little force to his. I dropped the element in his hand, smile bursting on my face. Mac's smile came back to him as he said, I can't wait to show everyone. Thank you so much. Without any more delays, Mac turned the other way and started to jog back in the forest to bring the gem back to the city so he could sell it and use the money to give the people in the area food. He went back to give the people hope once again. They must have had some incredible faith. I watched as Mac ran back into the forest all the way until I couldn't see him anymore. I collapsed to my knees, and thus my whole life was now wasted. My journey cut short. My journey at an end. I knew one thing for sure. Better to have my life wasted, rather than all the people back in the city. I would rather have my life gone than all of theirs. The night was silent, almost like the forest has come to a complete standstill. The moon was still bright, shining down on me, almost like it was sympathizing. The leaves lay around me, blowing gently in the quiet wind. A single tear rolled out of my eye, made its way down my cheek, down onto the hard floor. No noise was made. I closed my eyes, faced towards the moon, still on my knees, and took a deep breath in and out. I know I did the right thing. The people needed a glimmer of hope once again. I faced back down toward the ground with my eyes still closed. A noise. A very high-pitched one. A noise that seemed like it wasn't there. However, in the quiet night, it was audible. The noise was there, but then it slowly started to fade. There was a flash of light right under me. I quickly opened my eyes to see what I could not believe. A purple diamond-shaped gem was once again in front of me. However, this one acted like the other elements. The element of generosity. I slowly put my hand in front of me to grab it. I touched the gem, and it gave off tiny shocks, not strong enough to hurt me. Little shocks that allowed me to feel that it was real. That this was the element that I sought. I embraced the element tightly and started crying tears of joy. One more element. Just one more to go.